Hello and welcome to that 401k podcast. It's a very special episode of that 401k podcast because I actually have Dan Venturi here with me. And as we speak, we are at Citizens Bank Park right after the completion of that 401k conference. Dan, how are you doing?
I am doing well, sir.
We call it a very special episode of that 401k podcast because we always remember as kids in the 80s the very special episodes, especially Diff'rent Strokes. It'd be like Arnold got abducted on a very special episode, and Mr. What was the guy's name on WK? Gordon Jump. Mr. Carlson from WKRP in Cincinnati. He did something with Dudley that we don't really want to talk about anymore.
No,
But they even it's always funny with Diff'rent Strokes. They had Arnold and who was it, Kimberly get abducted, and then a couple years later they did it again with Sam. So I don't know. I grew up in 80s Brooklyn. I didn't know there were that many kidnappings in the city. But anyway, we got a very, very special episode of that 401k podcast. We'll talk about things that what we're seeing in the industry. We'll talk about that 401k conference. So it's kind of like a smorgasbord or how do we pronounce that? It took me a while to realize that was actually a Swedish word. I always thought it was a Jewish word because of the smorgasbords at all the bar mitzvahs and weddings. But anyway, what did you think of that 401k podcast? That 401k conference.
I thought today's conference was awesome. Cheesesteaks, the Philly Fanatic, and a bunch of really good presentations. We had solid turnout. I had the pleasure of bringing my two daughters, Layla Bell, known as the Bean, and Anna Bear, known as the Bear. They joined me on this trip, so that was great. Just another awesome show. Thankful to Ary for putting it together, and looking forward to a full slate in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. Everybody knows that I can't stand the Phillies. It was just funny to be here. I love the stadium. I love the city of Philadelphia, but I hate the Phillies. And it was funny to see the Philly Fanatic. I got a picture taken with the Philly Fanatic, and I put it up on Twitter. I said, if Rabin could shake Arafat's hands, that's a line that Marty Funkhauser used in the Palestinian chicken episode where, he agreed to eat it over there. Just based on that concept. So it was nice to take a picture of the Fanatic. Larry Anderson, former Philly, current Phillies radio voice, was here signing autographs and really entertaining a lot of the fans with stories. I mean, he's very uncensored. He says how he feels. That's why it's surprising the Phillies are bringing him back as a radio voice. But Larry does laugh at the fact that when he was with the Astros, Red Sox wanted him in '90 for their pennant run when Joe Morgan, the white Joe Morgan, was the manager of the team, and they made I think it was a 731 deal, a trading deadline deal. Red Sox got Larry Anderson, and they gave up a first baseman nobody's ever heard of ever since, a guy by the name of Jeff Bagwell. So it's really funny that Larry always brings that up because everybody brings that up. It's not often that you could say that you were traded for a Hall of Famer. So that was a lot of fun. Great presentations. Great questions from the audience. We're going to do more in 2019. We booked Tampa Bay, St. Pete. It's actually Tropicana Field in St. Pete. I always say Tampa. St. Petersburg. That's going to be Thursday, March the 7th, 2019. We got Kansas City, May 3rd, 2019. That's a Friday. We're looking at Atlanta probably on Friday, April 12th, 2019. And we have the inaugural That 401k Plan Sponsor Forum, which will be also in Tampa Bay, St. Pete, Friday, March the 8th, 2019. Great presentations and all that. You want to bring up some stuff that we were talking about at the conference?
Well, specific to the forum, one of the things that we are working on, I'm not saying that we'll have it in place, but we're working towards it, is having continuing education credits for both accounting folks and HR folks.
That's something that's in the works. I think that's something of interest, and hopefully we can do that. Tampa, St. Pete is going to be a lot of fun. And it's a great, obviously, even if you're a New Yorker or anybody up in the Northeast, Massachusetts, you want to get away, it's a great way. Thursday, we have the event. We may bring it. We'll see what kind of athlete we could bring in for the event. It's going to be a lot of fun, and for me, it's going to be a lot of fun to be out of the cold. Even though March, it's warming up a little bit in New York, but March, you could be, we had some pretty bad snowstorms in March.
Yeah, and look, we all have folks that snowbird. So if you guys are in the Northeast, it's a great opportunity to come down and see mom and dad, see a little spring training baseball, and enjoy a pretty cool 401k conference.
Yeah, I mean St. Pete. Hopefully, I can, with a couple of shekels, can I go to maybe Disney World because Tampa's not that far away, and we'll see what happens. It should be a lot of fun. And what else did we want to talk about? What about the conference stuff that people asked about and whatnot?
So a couple of things that I think rang pretty true or solidly in the conference. One, we'll do a plug to the cash balance folks because of the timing, right? Year end. Now's the time if you're an advisor to be out there pushing that solution. The other thing was something that Ary had mentioned, which is near and dear to my heart as a 316, but the fact that plan sponsors, as a rule, tend to be much more reactive than proactive, and sort of what that entails. And then the third thing that came up were MEPs again. The Pentegra folks were here talking about MEPs and when and where they work, in particular associations, as a great opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we've done an episode about the proposed rules. I think that it's still, it's still an opportunity. It's a matter of finding the right fit, and it was a great, discussion by Pentegra. They, illustrated, they're still going with the whole open map MEOP situation, which is that whole multiple employer aggregation program. They call it an open map, and also discussion. Because, I've sponsored a plan map in the past, and, the biggest problem when you have the one plan look, the idea of the audit once you hit 100 people, because once you hit 100 people, you have to pay for a $10,000 audit, and there are 100 participants in the plan. It could get really expensive in terms of how you afford that, and that's, the important part of a MEP is to achieve a size of critical mass. And if you don't achieve that size of critical mass, then you're going to have a problem in affording it and making it worthwhile, because the whole idea of a MEP is cost savings and, of course, limiting the liability for plan sponsors who are adopting employers.
Yeah. I got a bit distracted there. I apologize, guys. But to Ary's point, I think there are a ton of opportunities. We've talked about it all before. I think the one thing that maybe we'd want to explore a little bit more was this idea that plan sponsors tend to be passive and not proactive, right?
Yeah, it's something that I've always discussed, and it was in my presentation. I always feel that one of the biggest problems is plan sponsors are reactive rather than proactive. They're passive. They don't want to talk about their 401k plan until things blow up. And when they blow up badly. And, plan sponsors took a more active approach. To me, it's all about like taking care of your teeth. If you take care of your teeth, you brush, you floss, you're going to be fine. If you don't take care of your teeth, you're going to end up with a lot of cavities. You may end up with a root canal. And, preventative care could avoid a whole lot of damage with your teeth. But it's just funny that plan sponsors don't take that kind of approach when it comes to being a plan sponsor. They allow things to fall apart. And that's a problem because, as you as a 316 administrator, when you're proactive and you discover a problem, it's a lot easier to fix it than a couple years later down the line. And, again, also as a TPA, you've noticed that a lot of problems are only unearthed when there's a plan audit or when there's a change in TPA and, you're taking over a plan and all of a sudden you discover all these, you find out where the bodies are buried.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I think the other thing too to focus on when it comes to the latent tendencies of plan sponsors is what we've talked about almost in every podcast, is building your team as an advisor, right? Having an ERISA attorney, having a 316, having a TPA that you can trust, that can prevent these issues from bubbling to the surface and causing that headache. Because you know what happens when the headache starts. The phone's going to start ringing, and they're going to, meaning the client, the plan sponsor, is going to come after you, the advisor, and your relationship's going to become jeopardized. You won't have that same position, that same trusted position that you had before. They, when I was doing diligence work, they always used to, they've got like their terms, their industry terms, and one of them was not wanting to use all their gunpowder on certain topics, right, when they're negotiating with sellers. And I think the same thing holds true here, right? You as an advisor don't want to use all your gunpowder to get yourself out of situations that could have been prevented had you had the right folks looking after the plan with you.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is that you're not as an advisor, you're not an ERISA expert. You're not expected to be an ERISA expert. But the problem is that, plan sponsors also tend to be very, very passive aggressive. When there's a problem with the TPA, they don't address it with the TPA. They address it to the advisor, because then the advisor becomes the ombudsman for the plan. And, they kind of operate now as the complaint department. And so, when something's not getting done or something's done incorrectly, they always reach out to the advisor to complain. But, again, I still think that I've seen so many problems that took years and years to be manufactured and are discovered. And, especially something like a failed ADP test. When you have a failed ADP test and you find it at that time, you have ways to self-correct it. You can do refunds. And then at a certain point, if if the TPA screwed up on the testing, then you're kind of shut out of a lot of the corrections, and you're pretty much going to have to give a QNEC.
Yeah. Something as simple as paying refunds, right? I don't know if I've mentioned this in the past, but I mentioned this earlier today. I had an employee, a former colleague of mine, who didn't sign a form in time. Meaning he didn't sign it before 12/31, signed it 1/1. And that's no bueno. That's no good. It ended up costing us about $54,000 as a corrective contribution. So, we absorbed that hit. That was our responsibility, our liability as a 316. You can have plans where they don't have a 316 and they make the same mistake. They don't realize that it's as time sensitive as it is, and next thing you know, your plan sponsor is looking at a sizable correction, and that's gonna 9 out of 10 times sour a relationship.
Well, absolutely. Again, we've talked about this all the time. Like an advisor working with a TPA, they bring in a TPA and the TPA screws it up. I mean, that's always been a big problem, because I've always talked the situation of years ago when I was working for a TPA. Advisor brought us in. The HR person at the company didn't like us from the get-go because we weren't doing things that the other TPA did. And, we made a mistake here and there, and then we got fired. And then more importantly, the advisor got fired. So the advisor takes on so much more than just picking out funds. But going back to plan sponsors, I always talk about I do a retirement plan tune-up plan review for $750. I want to say in 8 years I've probably done about 10 of them. They don't want to pay the $750, even if they could play from plan assets. They don't want to know. I have a family relative I always talk about, never wants to go to the doctor. If I go to the doctor, she would say, if I go to the doctor, that means I'm sick, so I don't want to go to the doctor. Well, God forbid you have something wrong with you, like cancer, that you could find out early and prevent it. But, she knows best. And, she had a family friend. The father was also the same way. And he went with his family to Romania in the 70s. And he left early, and he wasn't feeling well. He came back to the United States. And within a couple of weeks, he was dead. He had leukemia. Never found out. And, a retirement plan is not like your health, not as important. But the story goes is that if you take care of things before they become bigger, it will cost you a lot less money. I've seen too many plan sponsors. Just a simple check of procedures and looking at what the plan says, they could avoid a lot of pain. And unfortunately, when a provider messes up, like a TPA, you only discover it when the rare chance they discover it and come forward and say we screwed up, or more likely when you have a Department of Labor audit, IRS audit, or there's a change in TPAs and the new TPA discovers it. It's really a bad thing, and as plan providers, it's a very very hard thing to come across to plan sponsors to let them know about it and let them fix this. So, what other things did you get at from the conference?
What else did I learn today? I learned that the Philly Fanatic he's the only creature, in quotation marks, that has his own locker room in the Citizens Bank Park Stadium. Players, umpires, everybody else shares a locker room. He has his own. And not only does he or she, I'm not sure what the sex of the Fanatic is, has specially made doors so he can get out of that locker room of his or hers.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun when he just came in there and just started fooling around with people. I just thought that was the funniest thing. And when I booked the event, they let you know the price range, and the rental was cheaper than New York or Chicago. So I said, it's worth it to have the Fanatic. And just to me, I thought it was hilarious, and he was a great guest, and he made a lot of the advisors laugh, and that's what it's all about. But we had a lot of discussion really about ERISA 338 services. We had some providers pushing that, which again, 10 years ago, I couldn't even, write out 338. I didn't even know what that, maybe 15 years ago, nobody knew what 338 was. Nobody discussed that. It's funny how that has really become a very, very big part of the business. And around the same time, 316 services that you've been pushing for years, that's something that, 15 years ago, nobody knew what that was. They knew that it was a section in ERISA, but they didn't know that there were providers out there that were offering it. I want to say when I was at that semi-prestigious law firm about 10 years ago, that's when I first heard about 338 services and providers offering it. I thought it was the greatest thing, but that's a section that's been in ERISA since the start of ERISA.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Going back to 72?
74, and then it was effective in 76.
I mean, right there. 316, 321, 338 are all from the same part of ERISA. They're all in the same section. I'm glad to see that it's gaining more shelf space in the advisors' minds. I think a lot of this industry is still specialized. There was and guys out there that aren't 401k specialists consider getting into the arena full time. There was a statistic that one of the providers had. Something like 1.6% of advisors had 30 or more, or 30 million or more in assets under management. So the marketplace is somewhere north of $5.5 trillion. So there's just a ton of opportunities out there, and there's a ton of opportunities for you guys to specialize, to build a team, and do what you do well, right? You guys are great in front of clients. You're great in the hunt, looking for the clients. You may not be entirely comfortable with the ERISA-E's, as Ary likes to say, with the liability inherent to the 401k world. That's where you bring in your specialists. That's where you form a team. You come to conferences like this to meet folks like 338s and 316s
and the Philly Fanatic
and the Philly Fanatic or Andre Dawson, whomever it may be. But you're putting together your trusted group of folks, and when you're out there in a competitive situation, you can call upon those folks as an asset to help you win that business.
Yeah, I mean, I think a great part of the event was the networking. The first event, the problem was I had too many sponsors and too many speakers, and went overboard and didn't have time for networking. And I thought this was a really great time. Have 15 minutes. Not, you don't need to hear from somebody give a presentation. Sit down and talk. Go to a bathroom if you need to, but a good break for people to meet, and it was great because you have the opportunity to talk to people and see where the interests are, and you can have discussions, and it's great tool for networking. So, I know people, advisors with the conference. Some people don't want to pay the $100 or $75, whatever it is. But in terms of the value of what you're getting lunch, you're getting 3.5 hours, 4 hours of content. You got an athlete appearance and a stadium tour. To me, it's the best value in the conference space for advisors. But that's me talking because I'm running the event.
No, hands down, it's the best value out there. The tour alone for some of these things costs you $25. He feeds you, and then he gets you autographs for an athlete. If you've ever been to a card show, most of those guys are costing $50, $60.
What do you thought? Tomorrow, Jason wants me to go see Gary Sanchez.
What's
$200.
$200 for Gary Sanchez. Serviceable baseball player, 3 years, 3 years in the league?
Yeah.
Right? We had Andre Dawson, a Hall of Famer, at Wrigley Field.
Andre Dawson charges that he's doing an event in Toronto because my son Jason tells me about who's at what events. So Andre's doing a show in Toronto. It's like $90 to meet Andre. But that's, that was lightning in a bottle when it came to have Andre at our events. Not every day you can have a Hall of Famer show up.
No, but the point is, between the content, the stadium tour, the food, and the athlete, you're not getting a better deal.
Yeah, but it's also great value for the plan provider sponsor because, again, you're meeting advisors, you're meeting other providers. I mean, we made a lot of connections.
I made a ton
that we're going to further explore with our Project X, which we're going to probably reveal in a week or so.
Project X.
Yeah, Project X, that's Project X. I always talk Project X. That's based on Howard Stern when he had the radio show on K-Rock and he did the TV show for WWOR Channel 9.
I remember that.
He couldn't talk about it on the air he had to call it Project X. And then eventually Infinity Broadcasting 92.3 K-Rock eventually sponsored his Channel 9 show, but for the longest time he would call it Project X. So we're working on a Project X, which we're very, very excited about.
Yes.
And a lot of plan providers are very, very excited about. And, this week we designed our logo, which was a lot of fun.
We did.
It came out great. It's always nice to work with the professionals on Fiverr. I don't know where my friends from Bangladesh does excellent work. And, I mean, he does exceptional work. He's the guy who does all the logos for that 401k conference, did the logo for the podcast. Thankfully, my picture will not be in our Project X logo, so I made sure of that. It's enough of my face. That's not what it's all about. But, yeah, I mean, it was a great opportunity. And who was the provider? I forget, was it Brinker or somebody, or was it Pentegra? They had a top 10 list for VCP mistakes. Why plans are in the VCP program.
Probably Pentegra.
It might have been Pentegra. It was actually a great list because for my practice, doing a lot of VCP submissions, the non-amenders, the late amenders, and their plan documents were still number one. And initially, that was always the biggest problem that I saw as a TPA attorney dealing with VCP. But these days, for me, it's compensation. That was number 2 on his list.
Excluded compensation?
Excluding compensation.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, basically, in English, compensation, the plan says one thing, practice was the other.
Yeah.
It's usually, it happens when they, exclude something or they include something that they didn't intend to.
Yeah, it's a shameless plug. This is too good for me to pass up. That's one of the things, the real values that Bright Worxx brings to advisors and to plan sponsors is we scrub all the payroll. So we know week over week if something's excluded, if comp's excluded. So it's just one of those things. The software is designed to pick up anomalies. So there's a trend. There's a 4-pay period prior trend. So if the software sees something that's not there, it starts to question things. We would still, in certain instances, need folks to tell us, "Hey, we got a comp increase." Obviously, if we don't know about it, it's not something that we can govern. But if something is known and then subsequently excluded, which happens a lot, that'd be something that we catch. And I'm not sure there are too many other solutions out there that would.
Yeah, I mean, it's really occurring to me. I mean, I'm getting calls left and right about it. I mean, there was a time last month in October, I had like 3 or 4 days in October, and it was like 3 or 4 different problems with different plans on compensation issues. And I mean, years ago, I always talk about the problem. When I was working at that semi-prestigious law firm, they had a client that was a bank, uh, and they were a client on other issues. And anyway, they had 20 years where they mistakenly excluded bonuses. Uh, they thought that the document said excluding bonuses, and they didn't. So they didn't allow people to defer. They didn't give employer contributions. And the biggest kicker was they were a publicly traded company. They were audited by a Big Four accounting firm, and for 20 years the auditors got it wrong. And the funniest part of that was I introduced them to a TPA to fix the problem. And I told them, you got to go to VCP and you got to fix it and you got to do it right. And they said, oh, what about self-correction? I said, you know what? How many people, how many years? It's just you can't self-correct it. You got to go to VCP. And, of course, they hired an attorney that said, oh, yeah, you could self-correct it. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm not, I don't need that kind of headache. Because there's nothing worse when you're telling somebody, oh, yeah, you could self-correct, and they get audited, and they say, oh, why don't you go for VCP? This was a VCP issue.
Yeah, I don't know how you can self-correct 20 years of anything.
1 year, yeah, a handful of people, that's fine. 2 years maybe, but, I mean, once it goes to, like, 3 years and you flub that up, I mean, I just can't understand how you could do that. But, hey, people want to, plan sponsors, again, being, reactive rather than proactive, and – they're always, a lot of them are always looking for the easy way out, even if it's not the right way, and they will take their chances on an audit. And, I always recommend them, fix it. You don't want to take the risk. There are a lot of problems out there with plan documents and 5500s. There are questions on the 5500 that if you answer incorrectly, they will audit you. And, who needs that kind of risk? And I really think that, nobody's told me, but, I know because IRS agents are no longer issuing the termination letters for new plans and restatements and all that stuff. They kind of allowed, it's just really on a, terminations and certain plans, and they pretty much got on the list. They're not firing agents. They're just giving them more work. And my sense is, yeah, it's going to be a lot of VCP stuff, but it's also a lot of audit work. And, I did talk to an agent not too long ago because he incorrectly rejected my client's application because he never responded to me. So he fessed up and said, oh, yeah, we screwed up. We should have contacted you, whatever. And he's telling me there are a lot of changes. He's getting more VCP work. Didn't talk about the audits, but I would suggest that, if, IRS agents have more free time, they're not sitting around the office playing solitaire.
No. I don't even think they have solitaire on those computers. Sorry.
Well,
those government issued computers. No, there's no way. Every waking hour, they're going to direct at something, right? Whatever the hot button issue is. So, I think the numbers got ramped up a little bit during the Obama years because the DL was hyperactive during those years, and then I think it kind of tabled out a little bit in terms of corrections. And I'm not sure with the recent numbers how they look.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I just really think that you don't want to take that risk. But again, it was an interesting list. Loans were, of course, always on the top 10 list. One thing that I've never had, but distributions that you weren't supposed to have. I mean, I've never had that problem.
Loans are, from a 316 standpoint, loans are probably one of the hardest things to administer. There are a lot of moving parts to them. Providers have complicated it now with the ability, allowing participants the ability to pay the loans off directly. So there are a lot of moving parts to it. Auditors, though, are starting to ask questions about loans not being defaulted, which was one of the things that came up this year, as well as the hardships, which I know we talked about in the past.
No, I mean, loans have always been a big problem. I've always said, if you allow loans, one loan outstanding at a time, $1,000 minimum. You don't want people in there coming in for a loan for $500. You also don't want to have a plan where you have 9 loans outstanding, because the more loans outstanding you have, the more chances are that one of them is going to slip through the cracks, not get repaid, and then you got a deemed distribution. And who needs that headache? Years ago, when I was working for TPA, I always tell the story. We had a new client coming on who was in the carpet manufacturing business, fancy carpets. So not the stuff for regular homes, really fancy carpets. But anyway, they had 8, 9 loans outstanding. We switched them to 1 loan outstanding at a time, and it just becomes more manageable. You just don't need the headache. You don't need the problems.
Agreed.
So I mean, it was a great event. We had all facets. We had 338s. We had Dan with the 316 service, which is always good. And it was always great to see some people. Scott Tanker was there, who was an advisor from Philly that I've known and worked with for 20 years now. I knew Scott years ago when he worked with us at CBiz, and then he also worked with me at Geller Group, which was a lot of fun. So it was always great to see him. Carlos Torice from Kravitz. I worked with Carlos at CBiz as well. And for him it was a lot of fun. He's a guy from Long Island, but for some reason he likes the Phillies, and he likes the Dolphins. So, he told Larry Anderson that he was a Phillies fan. Larry's like, from Long Island? He says, yeah, Larry Bowe is his favorite player. So, to each his own, I guess.
Yeah, there's no...
But then again, I'm an LA Clippers fan, so,
You should see, he's got this old school vintage LA Clipper Velcro wallet thing that he totes around.
Yeah, it's a Costanza wallet. It looks like George Costanza's wallet when he had that episode,
Yes.
I don't have any, coupons for a free map at any Tampa Exxon station or something like that.
That's why you got your bad back. That's why you were complaining about a back, because of that wallet of yours.
It's not that I really cut back on it, but it's a hot mess, and one of these days I'll fix it. But I mean, it's just like I got too many cards, too many receipts people give me. It's just never, I got to. The funniest thing is, not too long ago, I got one of those keychains, with the fob.
Mm-hmm.
I have like a giant keychain, and the funniest part is I had fobs from stores that were like no longer in business. I had like a Wallbaum's Wallbaum's thing. I had an A&P thing.
You never have enough.
I had a Toys R Us rewards.
They're doing pop-ups. Did you see that? They're doing pop-ups in Walgreens or something? They're in some store.
Well, they did pop-ups not too long ago. They used to do pop-ups for a while when they were still in business. I mean, it makes sense for them to do it. The name still means something. But the funniest thing is I always like when people lament when things go out of business. Like, for example, in where I live in Oceanside, and in Lynbrook there is a roller rink, hot skates. And I went there as a kid growing up in Brooklyn. I went to a Jewish day camp, Manhattan Beach Jewish Center Day Camp, and we would go from Manhattan Beach to Lynbrook, which wasn't that far with the Belt Parkway. And they're getting rid of it for a storage center, and people are, so upset. Hot Skates is going out of business, and for most of the people in the area, they haven't been to Hot Skates since I have in 1984. They haven't been there since then. Same thing with Toys R Us. I never cried about Toys R Us closing. Everything was marked up 20%. As a kid, I loved the store, but as a kid, You didn't have Amazon and Target and Walmart. I mean, we didn't get Target in Long Island until Caldors went out of business. Caldors.
I remember Caldors.
Caldors and Incredible Universe.
We didn't have that. We had Caldors.
Incredible. I've written an article about Incredible. You were never at the Incredible Universe in Westbury?
No. We had Crazy Eddie. Remember Crazy Eddie?
Well, Crazy Eddie, of course. But Incredible Universe was the stupidest idea I've ever seen in retail history. I wrote an article that's on that for on ksite.com. It was a concept by Tandy, Radio Shack.
Yeah.
They tried to compete, I guess, with Best Buy, so they came out with a store that was larger than Best Buy or Circuit City, but I always liked Best Buy better. Much larger than Best Buy. They had a little McDonald's in them, and the weirdest thing was, in the middle of the store, they would actually have a stage, and they would have musical acts perform.
While you were shopping?
Yeah, which was the stupidest thing, because it's distracting people from shopping.
I'm there to buy a TV, not listen to...
So they opened up about a dozen of these Incredible Universes. I want to say within 2 years they were dead.
They
They pulled the plug, and that incredible universe of Westbury became the first Target on Long Island.
Wow.
Where the old Roosevelt Raceway was. So yeah, it was a disaster. But I always love when people talk, oh, I used to love that. You haven't been to that store in 30, 40 years. What are you talking about? It always reminds me. My father would tell me stories. My aunt would reflect about time in life when she was in Israel in the 50s, and oh, how great it was. My father's like, we had no food. What is she talking about? She just remembers when you're younger. So I think we're running its course for our very special episode of that 401k conference, that 401k podcast.
Yes,
because I'm at the conference still. We are in a suite at the Phillies Citizens Bank Park, a suite I can probably not afford to be a part of during a game, but it's a lot of fun. Nice wallpaper.
Yes.
They got a nice little antique Coke fridge.
Definitely an old man.
And they got some nice baseballs here and all that stuff. I
mean,
nicer than the one at Citizens City Field. So, last but not least.
Yeah. So real quick, Anna wants to say something. Bears rule.
Okay. So until next week. It's so long from that 401k podcast. I got it right.
And real quick, thanks to all the vets and all the folks that provided service to the country. Enjoy Veterans Day on Monday.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.